Everybody, welcome back. This is episode 2 of Bluepty. This is Tim.
Hey, hey.
Hey, hey. So last video we did, it's some baseline pulls, and if you notice down here, you have the graph. We made 133, 140, 139 over 3 pulls, similar torque.
That sounds pretty good. There's no weird aberrations. How's that word?
Aberration? That sounds very spooky.
That's a $5 word.
It's a $5 word. So if there were some kind of odd things going on in the end, you notice here we have it made a little bit more power up on this last pull, and I started really down low. We're not really sure why I did that, and then it really falls over at like 5,000 RPMs, and we don't know why. Well, we do know why. It goes lean. So one of the points of doing all this stuff is to learn about Motronic and learn about this M20 in the car and share with it, because one of the points of doing this is that we're teaching and learning along the way. Tim and I both talk about that. If we don't, I don't know, if we don't share about it, if people can't engage in some sort of
You're kind of in a privileged spot where you have this dyno and you can catalog the actual data rather than, just operating on assumptions like a lot of people do. And they're probably grounded in some truth because somebody out there leaked it, but with the information so accessible nowadays, it's like it's a real disservice to sit on it and hide on it and let everybody else listen to their Uncle Bob who does all his wrenching under a tree. Now we can prove it, and you don't have to just rely on your butt dyno.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because, these cars have been around for 30 some odd, this is an 89, so it's been around for 30 some odd years. And, forums from forever ago, they had all these ideas of what made it do this or that, and there hasn't been a lot of data like what we're trying to do.
Right.
So we're learning this. This is information for us and that we will use, and we think we should share with everyone else, because let the cup pour over and get some extra on the way down. Yeah. So
everybody wins.
Everyone does win. Everyone does win, especially when you're eating a turkey sandwich.
Delicious.
Delicious. So anyway, today what we're going to do is we have the hood off, and if you notice, we don't notice yet, so we haven't shown you yet. There are some wires hooked up to the car back by the DME, which we'll show you. And what we're going to do is we're going to explain how simple Motronic works. So what is going on, what sensors are doing what, and how it's feeding back to the computer. And then we're actually going to show you with it on the dyno. We're going to play with some things. I'm going to adjust some things with the AFM. We're going to try unplugging some sensors. And again, show you what the data is doing and how it's actually changing how the engine runs. And then hopefully maybe see if it performs any differently. So Tim's going to hop in the car. We're going to change to a different dyno screen here to show you all the different sensors and get rolling here right away. All right, let's go. So here we are. We have Tim in the car, and we have all sorts of stuff connected to the M20. The dyno screen is up there on your lower bottom there. And there's data coming from the M20 back to the dyno using AM 22 channel CAN bus, and I have it back probed to the DME. So Tim, if you can turn the car on. Okay, so you should see some data pop up now. Engine RPM here, upper left, that is the engine RPM. This AFR is from the wideband. It's warming up and the car is not running, so it's 0. This voltage here, this is the AFM voltage. So what is an AFM? This thing right here is an AFM. The AFM is what figures out load on an M20 and M30, anything that runs Motronic 1.3, 1.1, 1.7, all the different Motronic setups. This happens on Porsches too. And what there is there's a little flapper door in this thing, in the actual AFM right here. So I'll show you that flapper door. This is the flapper door here on another AFM, and as the air comes in, it sucks that door open and it changes the voltage on coming to the computer. So we are logging the voltage on the AFM here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually lift this up. I'm going to push on it, and you're going to see on your screen right here where the mouse cursor is, where it's currently at 0.26 of a volt. So if I unplug this, it's going to go up, plug it back in. It's 0.26 of a volt, okay? And now, if I push on this, like so, you're getting varying voltage. See? 4.56 volts is where it goes up to, and then comes down to 0.26 of a volt. So the AFM is what's figuring out load to the engine. It gives a signal back to the computer, and that's how it figures out where in the map, how much air is coming to the engine, to then figure out how much fuel to inject. Now this screen here that you see, this is currently at 0 because the engine's not running. That will be the injector duty cycle. That's the ECU telling the injectors how much to actually spray. So this will go from 0 up to 100%. 100% would mean that the injectors are full open, wide open. They're running as much as they possibly can. And we're going to actually drive the car here in a little bit, and you're going to see how much fuel or how much percentage of the injector is injected based on the conditions of the car. Okay, so also in Motronic, really important is you have the throttle body. Throttle body in the car is living right here. Okay, and there's a TPS switch right here, a throttle position switch, and what that does is it senses idle and then nothing, meaning in between, and then wide open throttle. Okay, on an M20 it's just a switch. It's no variable, nothing different, just a switch. Then we have this guy. This is our idle control valve. Idle control valve lives right here on the engine. I'll give you a little extra close shot. Right here on the engine, TPS, idle control valve. Idle control valve is just a big leak. So it's a leak around the throttle body plate. So as this opens here, letting air into the engine, when it's closed at an idle, this has a short leak to be able to let air around to be able to actually keep the engine running and idling. Okay. Another important sensor on the engine is this coolant temp sensor right down in this area here. You can kind of see it right there. It's the blue one, and then this one here, I'll take this one off so you can see the blue one. The blue one is what's giving there, right down there. The blue one is giving data back to the computer to actually know how much, what the temperature is. If you notice right now, we're seeing this is at it's at 3.96 volts. Sorry, it's air temp. The coolant temp's at 4 volts. This voltage is going to change. It's based on a resistance of the sensor. I'm going to use this guy, this IR meter, to actually check temperature at that sensor. So we'll hop in here, and you can kind of see what's going on. It's cold here in Michigan. So if you notice, it says about 48 degrees right now. So 48 degrees is relative to 4.06 volts. And then as the thing warms up, we're going to shoot this a couple more times and show you what that is. Okay, so what else is going into the controls of Motronic? So also what's going in is the oxygen sensor. Oxygen sensor lives way over here. Okay, here's the connector here coming down, and you can see it's running right down there into the downpipe. We have 2 of them in there because one of them is for the wideband, and then if you look here on the dyno screen again, this 1.01 volts, that's our narrowband oxygen sensor. A narrowband just knows if it's rich or if it's lean. It doesn't know how rich or how lean, it just knows that it's not where it wants. It wants it to be at around 0.5 volt or 0.45 millivolts is what stoichiometric is. So right now when we see one, the sensor isn't heated up, which will explain once the car is running, but you'll see this voltage will change. So this is going to be at a high number close to 1 if it's rich, a low number close to 0 if it's lean. Okay, the engine has a fuel pressure sensor right here, which is vacuum adjusted. We have a gauge here right now. It is showing 0. Because we're going to play with some things on that, and that will show you if what the fuel pressure is, and we're going to adjust that. The fuel pressure should run around 40 psi when the engine's running, based with the vacuum. There's a whole bunch of information on that. We're not going to divulge or get into that too much. Okay, so we're gonna get the car rolling here on the dyno, just to hold maybe a third gear about 3,000 RPMs, and then we're gonna start playing with some stuff. We're gonna adjust the AFM while it's running. We're going to disconnect some other things and see what happens, and play with the fuel pressure and see what happens as we're driving along. On your screen, you should see our engine RPM, we see AFR right here, and then your O2 sensor, which it's gonna start coming up and start adjusting. All right, so here on the little screen, you see our duty cycles at 4. The car is rolling at about 1,100 RPMs in third gear, right? Okay, so just bring it up a little bit. I'm gonna put headphones on so it's a little bit quieter for myself. We're gonna check temperature. 160 degrees. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna actually play with the AFM. I'm gonna lift this up. Now watch what the AFR does as I add this in. Super, super, super rich as I add it in, and then you also will see the pulse width goes crazy. Because what we're doing here is we're tricking the engine. We're tricking the engine, and we're telling it that there's more air coming in than there actually is. So, kind of a funny little thing. All right. Okay. Now what we're going to do is fuel pressure is affected a lot too. So we're going to try crimping down the fuel pressure, raising the fuel pressure way up, and then seeing what happens. So here's our fuel pressure. And I'm going to crimp off the return. And we're going to watch the pulse width probably come down. And the AFR is still kind of holding steady. Adjusting as it needs. And then our pulse width comes back up here. Kind of cool. All right, let it come down a little bit. Let it just come down just a little bit. Okay, so now what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to unplug our oxygen sensor over here, because it's not going to like that, and then we'll see what happens. Okay, bring it back up. So now we don't have any adjustment of the actual AFR. It's going open loop just on our AFM. Oh, we gotta try that. We gotta try unplugging this. Actually, let's see what happens. If we unplug the AFM, it's gonna go. We'll see what happens. If you notice, our pulse width went through the roof, and it went extremely rich. It almost stalled, didn't it? So now, if we would probably crimp off our AFR a little bit, we got a little bit of a coolant loop right here on the toes, so we'll tighten that up. If we crimp this down, it's probably going to not adjust as much. By crimp our return, you see it's now we're going extremely rich on AFR, and our pulse width isn't adjusting. We're staying solid at 7 because our oxygen sensor is unplugged. Let it come down. Okay, so we're going to do 3 pulls here. We're going to do the first pull will just be bone stock. Everything's just running as it should. Everything's plugged in. AFM's plugged in. Oxygen sensor's plugged in. This is just a bone stock car. We're going to do a pull up to 6,000 RPM. Ready? Okay, it made the power we expected it to make. So we're going to restart the dyno. We're going to do a pull with our idle switch unplugged. So there's the idle switch unplugged, so it won't know that it's going to wide open throttle. Wide open throttle. Okay, go ahead and go, start the roll. And it's interesting to watch that idle or that pulse width, how the duty cycle goes as we do a pull. Ready? gonna plug that idle switch back in. If you notice, the idle is running high right now because it doesn't know it's idling. As I plug it in, it's gonna drop. So it's right underneath here, guys. Drop down a little bit, as we expect. So we're gonna unplug the, hang on. Yeah, now you can go. We're gonna unplug the oxygen sensor now. Unplugged. And we're gonna do one more pull. Again, third degree of pull. We're gonna watch what that AFR does now because the oxygen sensor is not plugged in. See if power goes up or not. Ready? We're gonna put the oxygen sensor in, let it calm back down for a second, let it cool off a little bit. If you notice, our coolant temp voltage is at about 1 volt right now. Let's check and see what our coolant temp is at the sensor with this stage. We're at 176. Upper hose, 157. Coming out of thermostat, 115. Aluminum, 137. 190. All right, let me shut it off. So that last pull, you kind of can see here on the data that we have, it's leaner because that's our second pull. That's with the wide open throttle switch unplugged. One thing that we've always wondered about is this big lean pop here at the end. They've all been doing this. So we're going to dig away at the data, show you some stuff here, and then we might, hopefully we can unravel why it's doing that and what's going on at that spot. All right, cool. So in front of you, you have 3 pulls that we just did. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3. And so far on the screen here, we have power, torque, and AFR. And then we're going to kind of show you some other stuff from there. So this was a baseline pull, made what we expected. Torque was a little bit high here, interestingly, so it just peaked there for some reason, who knows. Again, this is old computers. Turn the second pull on. Now the second pull is when we disconnected the wide open throttle switch. So our AFR went from 13.9, that was with the switch plugged in, the first pull, up to 15, really, really lean. Now, what's interesting is here up top is that up top with it unplugged, we actually had kind of nicer fuel ratios there. We had at 14.78, and then that first pull was actually in the 15s. Interesting. So what's going on is there is it's using 2 different spots of the tune with the TPS switch unplugged. It's just using kind of a mid-range tune, and the the switch plugged in, TPS plugged in, it's actually using the wide open throttle table. So this spot here above 5,000 is really interesting. That should be a lot richer. Did they do that to keep the engine together? So did it keep it? Maybe it was an emissions thing when you're wide open throttle. Who knows? But it's definitely something in the stock tune at 5,000 RPMs, and it goes lean in that area. Ask some old BMW guys. So third pull is when we had the oxygen sensor unplugged, but the TPS sensor plugged back in. 141, 142. So really close to that top one. It actually made a little bit more power. Let's see where it made that power. Bumbling along here about 5,000 RPM is where we made that little bit of peak. So where was it? So 136 at 54, 141 at 56. So yeah, at that higher RPM is when it made that power up here. That's what the O2 sensor unplugged. I mean, anytime you're doing pulls like this on a dyno, there are other situations going on. I mean, the temperature of the engine, the air that the engine's sucking in, how you put your foot into it. There's so many things, and there's only so much data that we're able to log through this setup, because it is, again, old Motronic, and there's only so much data. Now remember, we did log some other things that through the CAN bus. We did log log our AFM voltage and some other things. So let's look at that. We're gonna look at just the baseline pull again. This is baseline, everything plugged in, working as it is expected. And we're gonna look at some other data. So let's see. Let's look at the AFM voltage, and then let's look at that, just that first. So up here, power torque, down here, AFR. Over here, this is the analog voltage of the AFM, the voltage coming out of the AFM. And if you notice, it's slowly coming up and up and up and up and up as the engine comes up in RPM, it's sucking more air, AFM is opening more and more and more. So here's what's interesting, and a little behind the scenes. We did look at this, and we saw this earlier, and we saw some information. This is what's super crazy. Look at 5,000 RPMs, everyone here. Let's make this big, because this is. Here, maybe we can just move this up here. Oh, it's not going to like that. That's not going to like that. Oh. Hang in here with me, people. Okay, let's see. Let's make it big. All right, AFR, and then here is our voltage. We're going to zoom in on this a little bit. Look at that. Okay, so this is our AFR voltage. So you see, we're just cruising along here. We got 2 volts going on. This is when we're holding 1,200 RPMs before we stab it and lay into the throttle. And then look at up. So we stab into it, low RPM. We're at about almost 3 volts, and then it's coming up and up and up, nice and smooth here. And then look at this. This is what's interesting. 5,000 RPMs. We hit 4.4 volts. Now, if you remember back in the beginning of the video, if you want to hop back to there, jump back when we swept the AFM with this, my finger pushing on it, and it went up to about that voltage range. So there's an odd limitation of the AFM, that the AFM only hits about 4.5 volts at full sweep of the AFM. So that tells us that when we're ripping along here at 5,000 RPMs, that AFM it's out of steam. It can't meter any more air. It can't tell us how much air is coming to the engine, because that voltage range doesn't continue to go up anymore. We would think it would come up almost all the way to 5 volts, because it is a 5 volt reference signal. But there's some stuff going on in the ECU, and there's also some stuff going on in the AFM, whereas there's a voltage divider with a couple resistors and a potentiometer really in the AFM is what it really technically is. And there's some limitations of where it's going to hit. So the AFM, it's running on a steam. At 5,000 RPMs, guys, 5,000 RPMs, it's flatlined up there, up top. Who knows why the engineers said that was okay. Again, they wouldn't have a lot of this data back in 1989, I mean, as much as, they would, but it's maybe not as, they didn't have as much depth or something. Who knows? It is, time and goes away. And then our AFR, again, right at 5,000 RPMs, look at that. It goes super lean. We have to 1,500 for 15.7, and then it has this little dip right here. Who knows? And then it goes really lean probably when we let off the throttle, and then it hits the rev limiter and it goes goes lean. This also could be what could be happening here. This could be a soft limiter. It could be a gentle, like a soft limiter in the actual tune, where it starts to pull a little bit of fuel as you start getting closer to red line. And again, that might just be to keep the engine together for the manufacturer, because it was made as a production car to drive, and maybe it just is how they set the tune. Obviously it is how they set the tune. So let's look at the other ones just since we have this up and see if it changed any different. Same thing, we're maxing that out. Same thing. The AFM, if you notice, it's laying right up on top of each other. Our AFR here, this is the one that's really high. This is when we had that wide open throttle switch unplugged. So what are we learning from this is that when you're full throttle, wide open throttle, and you don't have a wide open throttle switch, it is going to be detrimental for your torque production. So we have less torque here down at the bottom. Is it horsepower? Not really much. It's not really different, but something under the curve, it's definitely making less power. Probably because in this area here, we just aren't given enough fuel for the engine to actually produce torque and to make power. So if you have a stock M30 or a stock M30, actually an M30 and M20, anything that has Motronic 1.3, if your throttle position sensor is broken and you are not getting the wide open throttle, you're going to lose out on a little bit of torque. And the engine is also going to run extremely lean all across the board when you're on full throttle. So make sure that works. But also, if you look at these two, if we have oxygen sensor plugged in or unplugged, this is the narrowband oxygen sensor. It didn't really make any difference of AFR. Maybe we're a little bit different here. I mean, we're 13.9, 13.8. I don't think we can call that anything. And power-wise, it's a little different. But again, that very likely could just be from the poles. Let's look at that. This thing. There we go. There it's crisscrossing there. Who knows if just what it's doing in that spot. That little dip there is interesting. This dip here, 5,000 RPM. And then it didn't do it there. That's where we made that big power there, big difference there. It's hard to say. It's hard to say what happened. And again, this is, the AFM could be a little bit worn. There's so many things that could be wrong, or little things that might be going on here. This is it's an AFM that's 30 years old. It hasn't been rebuilt or anything. It's probably the condition of most M20, E30 AFMs out there, or M30 or whatever AFM is on. That's just the condition of what it is. Interesting. So I do wonder about that voltage, the 4.5 volts, if we had a different AFM, if we had a bigger AFM, would it make a difference? Would it change it? So with that said, what we're gonna do is we have a M30 AFM. We're gonna toss that in there and not change the tune at all. It probably won't like that because it's going to see a voltage and think something's going on. But who knows? Maybe it will like that. It's a simple little test. We're going to throw that in there, do a pull or two, and see what happens. So here's that. So after digging through the data, we've found out that the AFM was pegging at 4.5 volts, and that's when it went lean. So we're going to throw an M30 B34 MAF on there, or MAF, sorry. M30 B34 AFM on there and see if it flows more air, stock chip, we didn't change anything, and see what happens. So go ahead and start it. So it's running, idle's a little bit finicky. If we look here at the narrowband sensor, that's warming up. So to see how it's at 1 volt right now, it's gonna slowly come down, and when you watch as it warms up now, I bet when it hits about 0.5, the idle is going to smooth out. Pretty smooth. So what it's doing is it's actually able to correct itself with the oxygen sensor that's plugged in there. Go ahead and start rolling, Tim. I'm going to put headphones on. So we're going to do a third gear pull again, up to 6,000 RPM. And see what happens, see if it makes more power, see if it goes lean up there or not, and, see what happens. Ready? Yeah, big difference. You shut it off. So that was interesting. So I was watching the pull through the whole thing, and it was extremely lean, like really lean the whole time. So we were up in the 16s, 17s the entire time. And it still maybe went lean at the end there. So that didn't work. All right, so that was cool. I mean, it didn't do anything. It didn't really make any more power. It actually made way less power. So let's look at this. Let's look at the data here. Now this is, we have all of them on here. This is the first base pull, and then here is the fourth, we're gonna call it fourth pull. Fourth and fifth are with the M30 AFM bone stock tune. Let's see what it did. So it actually may look at way less power. Let's change this color. That's something that's a little bit more seeable. That's not very good. Something dark. That works. It made way less power everywhere, all over the place. I mean, our peaks was, we went from 140 to 121. We went from 148 to, I gotta look around the camera, to 130. Huge amount of power difference. So let's look at our AFR as we did before, and then let's also look at that AFM voltage. Let's see if the voltage stayed the same. That's what I want to see. Look at that. So these are our AFM, or sorry, AFR. This is the Motronic. This is stock Motronic stock M20 AFM stock tune. This is our M30 B34 AFM, and oh my gosh, look how lean it is. It is extremely lean. If this was a turbo car, the engine would have been on the ground. We would have done this. So it obviously made less power everywhere. Because it just wasn't fueling it the proper way. And now here is our voltage curve. Even the curve is different. So the stock one, let's look at like 3,000 RPMs. We have 3.66 volts and we have 3.35 volts. And it didn't peg out at the end the same way. So it's definitely flowing more air for sure because the voltage is lower, but it's not telling the ECU, the DME, the correct voltage to supply the correct pulse width to give it the fuel that it needs. Okay. Now, if there was a tune in there, then absolutely that would make a difference. If it was tuned for that AFM, it might make more power. It might not peg out, because if you look at the end, look at this voltage here. Let's zoom into this little spot right here. That the M20 AFM, it pegs, and we're holding that flat. It flatlines right there at about 5,000 RPMs. Now the other one, look at, we're a little bit lower at 4.17, and it never really hits that cap of the 4.42. So if this AFM was tuned, if we had a tune chip for this AFM, would it make more power? Or would it at least make the same amount of power? Yeah, it would probably make the same amount of power. Would it make more? Who knows? We don't know. Maybe a little bit right out here at the peak. I think we might make a little bit more. I mean, maybe 5 horsepower, 5 foot-pounds of torque. So, interesting. Data's cool, and that's kind of the point of this, is to dig into the data and find out what this thing is doing stock, because we don't know, and it's an experiment. So appreciate you guys hanging along, watching all this information. Hope it was informational and you learned something along the way, because that's again the point. So the next video is actually going to be on figuring out if your car doesn't run. So this is going to be M20. Again, stock ECU, stock EFI, of troubleshooting a no start condition. And we'll talk a little bit of maybe poorly running stuff, but if you notice, if you watch through this video, it's going to give you some information of how the different sensors work and what they do and how it can make the thing run poorly or differently. So next one, we'll do it right here. It's still in the dyno room, and I'm going to go through some things and explain how we think the Motronic is working now that we got this data, and then show you what needs to be there for the thing to actually run. Okay? Appreciate you following along. If you like this, please subscribe, share it, tell other people, because that's the only way to build a community, is through all of you. And remember, if you're going to have a sandwich, make sure you have really quality bread. Have a good day, everybody. Bye.